So I would like to welcome all the panelists. Thank you, Ashish, for all the support given, all the participants. So without taking too long in this first opening moment, I would just ask Giovanni, are you ready to begin the presentation? So welcome, Joe, and I will finish my sharing here so that you can begin your speech. Welcome, Giovanni.
Welcome all. Can you hear me clearly? Or... Okay, perfect. So I will try to share my my presentation, if I manage to do that. Okay. Okay, here we are. So what I would like to do today is to share some general ideas about what has been and will be intra-BRICS financial cooperation after the pandemic. First of all, how much time do we have?
Sorry, John.
How much time do I have?
20 minutes for a presentation.
Oh, well, I will take less. So I would like to share some general ideas about what we like the intra-BRIC financial cooperation after the pandemic. This pandemic, as we all know, has been of immediate human and economic cost, because it threatened severe acquired rights of populations since the establishment of the Bretton Woods international framework. What we can see is that COVID-19 and its backlash could threaten to scale back years of progress on reducing poverty and inequality, which are fields in which BRICS have been champions during at least the last decade. So I would like to, these are the guidelines of my presentation. So I would start to giving a short overview of what the World Economic Forum considered in 2020, the top global risks. I will talk a little about the global situation after the pandemic, and specifically the economic situation and the growth projections for the whole world with regional area comparisons. After that, I will give an overview of BRICS working framework, past and present framework, and in particular tools and projected tools that BRICS intend to adopt. And then I will try to sum up with some conclusions. For what concerns the top global risks, according to the World Economic Forum Outlook, we can see that according to this report, among the highest likelihood risks of the next 10 years, there are extreme weather, climate action failure, and human-led environmental damage. While on the top global risks by impact, and it means that it focuses on the impact that this risk could have on the societies at large, we find that at first place there are infectious diseases, as we all witnessed last year. At second place, there are climate action failures, and at the third place, there are weapons of mass destructions that are perceived as the more likely global risks by impact. There is as well a time projection of what top global risk could be in the short term. It means in 2 years at maximum, and in the long term, it means in 10 years. In the short term, as you can see, we have infectious disease, livelihood crisis, and extreme weather events. While on the medium terms, we start to witness the emergence of more structural risks, like asset bubble burst, information and technology infrastructure breakdown, and price instability, that are all factors that threatens equally advanced and least developed economies. And in long term, if all these risks are not going to be assessed and contrasted, we can witness weapons of mass destruction without risk, state collapse, and biodiversity loss. So from this initial presentation, it is clear that the theme of cooperation and multilateral cooperation in the upcoming post-pandemic world will be the key to address all the possible challenges that we will be forced to cope with. After the pandemic, the economic global outlook is, as you can see, I took the 2020 data because they are more reliable in the picture that they depict. As you can see, the only country that experienced a growing trend has been China, with in the second quarter a growth of 3.2%, and in the third quarter of 2020 a 4.9%. All the rest of big or advanced economy, as you prefer to call them, experienced dramatic losses in their growth rates. Like you can see, perhaps among these, the United Kingdom is experienced the most dramatic drop in its economic competitiveness and growth rate. And according to the International Monetary Fund World Economic Outlook, the 2021 update, this is the situation, the projected situation in 6 years, starting from 2020 to 2026. And looking at this graph that I elaborated starting from the IMF data, what is astonishing is that among the United States, Euro area, the European Union, the G7 countries, and the BRICS, the most outstanding economic performances will be reached only by BRICS countries, as you can see on the right column. Okay, and the pivotal actor of this growing trend, of this growth trend, will be China in the projection of the International Monetary Fund. And as you can see here, neither in 2020 China experienced a growth drop, and in 2021 it is projected to have the most acute growth trend of its gross domestic product, as well as in the following years up to the 2026. Here you have a slight comparison between the intra-BRICS projected GDP growth and the intra-G7 projected GDP growth. And this tendency line show you the mean of the considered group. And among BRICS, between BRICS and the G7 economies, you can see that the most stable performances are performed by BRICS. And here again, China and India will be the major player in this growth trend and in this economic development trend. So this considered, during the India presidencies, the most important documents that have been adopted forming the BRICS working framework, in my understanding, have been the BRICS joint statement on strengthening and reforming the multilateral system, and in particular at the level of the International Monetary Fund and the World Trade Organization. This is really important because during this pandemic, BRICS countries struggled to adopt a vaccine coordination mechanism, which possibly would have been distinct by the internationally organized COVAX initiative. And again, in this initiative, China played lion's share in sharing its vaccines. On the IMF side, we must consider that during this sanitary crisis, all the overall volume of regional financial agreements remained low, as the demand of RFA financing was contained by supportive macroeconomic policies. And overall, in the case of liquidity assistance to developing countries, multilateral development banks and official bilateral donors were projected to cover about 30% of the financing gap of countries that receive IMF financial support. And this resulted in that request for IMF financing arrangements from countries that received IMF financial support identified a total financing gap of $134 billion, which was projected to be filled predominantly by the International Monetary Fund. So this stands in highlighting that BRICS countries, as an international group, still lacks the capacity to put in place a credible contingency reserve arrangement, which is currently under test with the International Monetary Fund. And this constrained the ability of BRICS countries to adopt a shared contingency reserve arrangement framework and liquidity assistance framework between them, which was this role was partly played by the new development bank, but we will see this later. Among the other documents, there is the BRICS Trade Minister Joint Communique, which is formed by the BRICS Cooperation on Multilateral Trading System, the Cooperation for Protection of Genetic Resources, Traditional Knowledge and Traditional Cultural Expressions under the BRICS IPR Cooperation, the Framework for Ensuring Consumer Protection in E-Commerce, BRICS Framework for Cooperation in Trade and Professional Services, and in my understanding, two of the most outstanding initiatives taken lately by BRICS. That is the BRICS Partnership of New Industrial Revolution and the BRICS Innovation Cooperation Action Plan. All these tools are to be added to the previous adopted tools in 2020, which are the strategy for BRICS economic partnership, that is a major instrument within the BRICS economic track that is aimed to help the 5 countries to step into new industrial revolution and promote shared interest in the following areas that are sustainable trade and investment without barriers and sanctions, advancement of digital economy in the interest of BRICS citizens, and sustainable growth and balanced development in the context of climate, energy, human capital development, and food security. BRICS adopted as well the guidelines for promoting effective participation of micro, small, and medium enterprises in international trade. That implies to exchange views and share best practices of measure and approaches to integrating MSMEs in the mainstream economy. Trade ministers agreed as well to foster collaboration with the Partnership for the New Industrial Revolution to encourage capacity building in cutting-edge technologies and to establish BRICS industrial and science parks, innovation centers, as well as technology incubators and networks of enterprises. Have been also published the BRICS Understanding on Investment Facilitation, which is aimed at strengthening cooperation with promoting cooperation, enhancing transparency, and improving efficiency of investment operation. And finally, among the most important, in my view, there is the agreement between environment ministers to promote the circular economy in the context of sustainable partners of production and consumption. Considering the role of the main financial institution of BRICS, the New Development Bank played as well a considerable role by lending around $10 billion to member countries. You can see here that China received for the emergency response alone of around $1 billion $0.34, which is 7 billion renminbi in their value, as well as India with 1 billion, South Africa with 1 billion, Brazil with 1 billion, and so on. All summed up, it counts $10 billion of aids divided into emergency response loans and economic recovery loans. The new development-based portfolio, after these interventions, amounts to commitments for a total of nearly $28 billion, and 1/3 of this portfolio have been committed in COVID-related financial operation. And as here, I noted here on the side of this slide that the contingency reserve arrangement rested in standby, because, as I said previously, all the liquidity assistance have been provided by the global financial safety net established within the International Monetary Fund. So this is more an evocative slide, which is referred to the gains that investment in research, development, and innovation could assure to a country. Here you can see a comparison between the European Union with 27 member countries, the USA, and China. And on this column, on this left column under EU 27, you have two columns for each country, okay, for each grouping. The left column tells you how much in percentage related to GDP the grouping or the country has invested in research, development, and innovation. And on the right column, you see how much was the differential between each year in the evolution of that amount of invested money. You can see in this graph on the right that the most stable and outstanding performances in the growth rate of the gross domestic product have been that of China. While for the United States and the European Union, there have been a discontinued growth rate, as you can see, with the dramatic fall in 2020. And it is not the case that between 2012 and 2011, China experienced the most dramatic differential in investment spending on research, development, and innovation, bumping from the 3.9 differential in 2011 to the 7.4% differential of 2012. So if it's not a definitive correlation, this table and this graph can help us in understanding that consider all the scenarios and the facts that I introduced before, perhaps a good strategy for maintaining a sustainable, stable, and profitable growth rate and development could be a massive investment commitment in research, development, and innovation. And moreover, considering the specificity of BRICS countries, that it is geographical discontinuity, perhaps science cooperation and science diplomacy between and among BRICS countries, even on the financial side, can assure this grouping, this international grouping of international actors, the most reliable way to assure themselves a consistent developmental path. In conclusion, I think that all consider BRICS countries should further strengthen their financial cooperation, because as we saw in the case of the contingency reserve arrangement of the NDB and the financial assistance in terms of liquidity that BRICS countries and in general developing countries and the global south needed from the International Monetary Fund, BRICS countries, if they are to sustain the growth of global south, not only in economic terms but also in political terms, must develop their own international financial framework with an adequate international financial institution that would be not concurrent but alternative to the International Monetary Fund, considering all the failures in the talks for the reforming of the International Monetary Fund voting system. The second point is the point that I already illustrated before, that is science policy. And the third and final point is the need, in my view, for BRICS countries to develop an alternative and non-concurrent multilateral framework which should side with the existing one, which is notably dominated by a Western way of managing international affairs. So this is all, and I hope to have been clear and to have satisfied your curiosity and most of all your expectations. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Giovanni, for the great presentation. I think we had an introduction to the thematic of the panel now. Joe, if you could stop sharing the screen.
I'm trying, but I'm not so practical with Zoom. So,
Ashish, can you help us?
I can stop it from my end.
Ashish, yes, take the control of my computer, please.
Joe,
okay, sorry for the inconvenience.
So I would like to invite all the participants to, in order to have a more cozy environment of exchanging ideas, to open the camera so that we can have a more prox environment. So now, after thanking Giovanni for the great presentation, I will begin to share some ideas focusing on the institutional point of view of cooperation and the role of multilateralism. So I would share the screen. So Marko, welcome to the panel, and please prepare yourself for the next presentation. Okay. Please let me know if the screen share is going on. Is it coming? Amanda, is this appearing already? Okay. So the presentation would be on international cooperation within BRICS, global shifts, and the new global governance. This part was the panel presentation, so I would begin with an initial, let's say, starting, asking if can we think already on an eventual post-pandemic scenario. So we know that the institutional framework, even before the pandemic, wasn't able to answer to the demands of the global community. And after the pandemic, this was, let's say, more potentialized, and this was more exposed, that the level of coordination wasn't the one needed or desired in order to face the level of the crisis. So when we think on the multilateral system, we know there are many critics that can be done in the way of dealing with the international system and the international institutions. The system proposed that each country would have voice within the global governance, and all could be participants in this structure. But in the end of the day, we know that the asymmetries that are part of the interstate system, they also can be seen in the way the global governance and the international institutions, let's say, behave. So there are many critics that can be done to this, but on the other hand, we don't have another system that would be ready to substitute the one on force now. This is the point. So we can ask some initial questions for the debate. So how can we deal when the asymmetries of the interstate system, they are exposed in the international framework of multilateralism? How this issue can be dealt or covered by on a more efficient way of strengthening the codes of cooperation and coordination between the countries for global issues. So this is something that is under debate, of course, until now. And in the context of the pandemic, this is more highlighted, we can say like this. And within the system where the powers are asymmetrics, can we see a power reconfiguration on global scale? Is it possible to observe that this is happening? And if so, what's the role of the multilateralism on the 21st century? Are we moving to a strengthening of these ties, or we are moving to more national answers or bilateral agreements or unilateral solutions to the crisis? How are the players moving in the present context? So if we consider that the liberal Bretton Woods orders are showing signs of a collapsing system, where are we moving to? This is the point I would like to bring here to try to understand which possibilities we have in terms of institutional representativity and institutional framework on global governance. What is new? What is happening? How can we deal with a system that cannot answer with the demands at the same time that we don't have another one ready to substitute this? We are in the halfway, right? So trying to manage the possibilities of answer of these questions, we can ask ourselves, what is the stimulus for the countries to the strengthening of multilateralism, let's say like this? Because if you belong to a club, but you can't interfere in the dynamic of this, you are just a rule taker and not a rule maker. And this makes the symmetries get wider, right? So we are talking about many challenges the global community are facing nowadays, and we can ask, what are the real possibilities or effective possibilities of cooperation? Which kind of stimulus the countries have in order to boost and foster cooperation? So it's clear that for dealing with the contemporary scenario, there is the need of bigger coordination. And the level of coordination we are seeing until now is below the demands. So what are the barriers? Why new dynamics face so much resistance to be implemented? These are some issues we can talk and debate here as let's say, people interested on this debate on international relations. So what do we need to move ahead and find new solutions for old and present challenges? Of course, the pandemic brought new scenarios, but many of the challenges we are facing, they are a new version of something that was already going on. So we have all this poverty, inequality, issues that weren't solved yet, and that now are facing a potentialized effect on global dynamics. We are watching the migration movements in between countries, all the conflicts related to this. And one possibility that I could point here would be that cooperation does not exist when the tides of trust and solidarity are not clear. So this could be a path to reinforce these tides in order to advance in terms of coordination and cooperation to face contemporary challenges. So as we are joining the People's Forum on BRICS, and the thematic of this year is building solidarity. So how can we check the path that was taken by these countries? So we know they are big economies with big territories and big possibilities of commerce intra-BRICS. So the original idea was to make these transactions without passing by dollar. So trying to understand how to behave in the context of 2008 crisis. And although the heterogeneity that exists in these countries, they built a cooperation platform permeated by that the decisions should be taken by consensus. So this is an interesting point if we consider the heterogeneity between these countries, members, or economies. We know that all these countries had their own challenge, but as a bloc or a group, there is this trial to build a common platform to develop or to overcome, catching up process, developing of the bloc or even the national economies, and in order to reduce inequalities on global scope and overall thinking on these emergent countries. So at this point, we can ask, what's the space that exists in terms of global governance? Because this is the main issue that, let's say, put these countries together. They would like to have another voice in the international system, and overall, they would like to have more participation in the global governance process. But how can this be done while, let's say, traditional or old powers, they don't want to lose space, while the new proposal or the emergent countries would like to have another level of participation within this scope? So how can we harmonize this equation? Let's put it this way. I would move to the 5 pillars that unite this bloc of countries. That would be promoting cooperation for economic growth and development, cooperation in terms of political and economic governance, social justice, sustainable development and quality of life. And sustainable development is a platform that also refers to the way of financing projects from the New Development Bank, and we are going to move to this in a while. The 4th pillar would be related to peace and security, and the 5th on progress through sharing knowledge and innovation. That is somehow the less easy to promote because this involves not just the government, but also the private initiatives. So this harmonization is not, sometimes it's not easy to manage and conciliate. Anyway, it's not a coincidence that the BRICS summit began on 2009. Although there were these India, Brazil, and South Africa beginning of interaction, IPSA, and these countries, they had somehow similarities in the way of behaving in international forums. Of course, the 2008 crisis was a push in order to formalize the agreement of the BRICS. So 2009 is not a coincidence for being the first summit. And we know that it began on 2009 and 2010 without South Africa being an official member. They were joining as a participant, let's say, but not as an official member. And this happened in 2011 meeting. So here the official acronym is, let's say, done. In the last years, 2020 and 2011, we had the virtual edition of this event, this main summit, and we know that also there are many other parallel forums that happens between. So the idea is to decentralize the decisions in parallel forums, searching to incorporate government perceptions, academia perspective, civil society into the process by these forums like BRICS Digital, BRICS Civil Forum, BRICS Business Council, in order to promote easier conditions for commerce intra-BRICS, BRICS Academic Forum for building partnerships between universities and research, and all the countries, they have a BRICS think tank council that are also promoting debates to feed the main annual meeting, the main summit. So in order to move to my final remarks, I would like to, before talk about the relevance of the New Development Bank. Why this is important to take into consideration when we talk about BRICS. First of all, because it's the main institutional agreement they have, right? Between all the proposals, New Development Bank is something concrete, is something institutionalized to promote the catching up for these countries in the path for development processes. And then what is new? Is the first time that, well, some characteristics. It was founded on 2014 in the context of the 6th BRICS Summer Summit in Brazil, in Fortaleza. And then the idea is to promote loans for promoting development, but related to clean and sustainable development platform. So the initial capital of the bank was around $100 billion with, like Giovanni mentioned, with the same amount agreed for the contingent reserve arrangement. 2016 was the first loan that was authorized by the New Development Bank. It was in December 2016 to China, and for the project entitled the Shanghai Lingang Distributed Solar Power Project. So we can check both requirements that for the projects that are financed by the bank, something related to infrastructure and catching up for development process, but also related to a sustainable development platform as is solar power. But my point here as a broader analysis would be that is the first time that a bank aspiring to be an institution of global scope is being built exclusively by not traditional powers, not powers from the core, right? So this is something new in terms of global governance. The bank was founded without the official participation of any developed country. So how was the performance of the New Development Bank in the COVID crisis? Giovanni also presented more detailed. The total financial aid was around $10 billion. We saw that China took the bigger part, but each country took a part. And we can say that these hadn't solved all the issues of each country, but it was an important contribution to have a parallel way for financing national issues in a moment of need, let's say like this. So at this point, we can ask, what is needed for BRICS countries to increase the level of the cooperation they are showing nowadays? What can we say about their unity and their continuity in a post-pandemic scenario? But to understand this, we should understand not just the position of the members towards the bloc that keeps changing a long time, right? But we should take into consideration also what is the answer the global community is giving for the post-pandemic scenario. Would the international system would move for a more national and unilateral or bilateral agreement, so in a more isolated way, or multilateralism would be reinforced, or even something new is coming to the scene? I was reading the article of Mariana Mazzucato recently, and she was proposing some ideas in this direction. So for who is interested, I can share the link here in the chat. So this is something interesting and important that should be debated by the academic community to understand the scenarios we can find, right? So I would move directly to final remarks. Yes. So in this recovering process, what is needed? Do we need more walls or more bridges? So naturally, coordination is a key in order to overcome the crisis scenario faster and more effectively. And this is somehow not in its best shape when we think on the performance of the international institutions and of the international framework. So when we talk about these international institutions derived from the Bretton Woods Agreement, are they stronger? They are moving to a stronger reality, or they are being emptying? And if they are emptying, what is the new, the framework that would take place in this field? So what can be said, and how can we think on proposals that could be useful for policy design in this direction? So we can see a lack of international coordination, and this brings a lot of global impacts. So we are moving for almost 2 years of this pandemic scenario, when vaccination is very late in many countries. And we know that while this is not solved, all the chain is, let's say, impacted by this. So my impression, and I would conclude with this, is that while the part is being seen as prevailing to the perception that the whole is the key to be solved, we are in a trap. The pandemic has showed that we can't save a part without thinking in the whole, because this is easy to be disconstructed. So the perception that there is a whole to be taken in consideration for the global community is something essential for us to advance. And how can we practice our creativity in order to propose solutions and common values for a new international platform? What can be the new approaches that we can explore to solve old and current challenges. This is something I would propose for the debate. So these, together with Giovanni and Marko that are joining the panel, and also Shraddha, was the book that we promoted on the end of 2019, where some discussion related to all these topics that are mentioned came with many researchers to compose this book. So who is interested is very welcome to join. And I would like to thank everyone for the space for sharing these ideas, and hope we have a moment in the end to debate some of these points. I will stop sharing in order to move for next presentation. So Marko, are you ready to begin?
Yes.
So if you could open the camera, and the floor is with you, Marko. Welcome to the panel. So if you would like, I would introduce the thematic of your speech. That would be on, this is Marko Juutinen that is going to talk with us about BRICS and the geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific, contemporary challenges. So Marko, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Do you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, okay. So, thank you for Giovanni and Gabriel for your presentations. My presentation will be a little bit of a bird's eye view of that involves a little bit of the facts, or builds on the facts presented to us by Giovanni and Gabriel. I will argue, or the argument that I will try to present is about the role of BRICS and the Indo-Pacific region as a kind of setting for new multilateralism, or revival of multilateralism. So in other words, I will argue that BRICS, in a sense, can present us with a kind of solution for the big dilemmas of global governance that we since the retreat of US and the dissolution of the so-called Pax Americana are perhaps experiencing. So this is the title page of my presentation. So my name is Marko Juutinen. I am a doctor of social sciences, and together with Giovanni and Gabriel, we are seeking to launch a research project on the themes of the Indo-Pacific order, and how to shape the global governance, make the world more governable in spite of the increasing power play between major powers and the threats of climate destruction. Okay, so this presentation consists of basically three ideas, or three ideas. So the first is background on the very short background on global challenges, then a short presentation of the geo-economic challenges that we are experiencing within the emerging global order.
Marko, if you allow me, there is a small screen in red that you should close because it's in the middle of your presentation. Yes, now it's done. Yes, good. Now you are in the cover.
Yes, we are in the cover, yeah. Okay, okay. So the three parts in this presentation. I will just begin with that. Now, well, let me recount again. So the first part is about the current situation of the challenges that are changing the global order. Then the second part is about the very big outlines of what appears to be coming, or what seems to be the somehow the basic cornerstones or building blocks of the new order, at least on regional sense. And then finally, I will talk about BRICS as a case of how to manage governance within the emerging order, and as kind of a solution for the big governance dilemmas that we are currently experiencing. Okay, let me begin now. So, changing global order. This is the result of the big power shifts that we have been experiencing, at least since, well, I suppose since the 80s or 90s. There have been many books written about this from many different perspectives. One example is the Global or Great Minotaur, written by the former Greek economic minister of finances, I think he was, Yannis Varoufakis, who argued that the US role was dependent of the might of its banking or financial system, that it could live and bloom because it attracted to its financial markets the money of the rest, and that this financial power disrupted, like at least or latest by the big financial crisis of, was it 2007 or 8? Now that is one of the big issues we have seen. Well, and then okay, this is one aspect. The changes in the financial backbone of the global system. There is no longer such a financial center that can like control and bring stability, even if asymmetric kind and perhaps unjust kind, but anyway, stability. So we do no longer have that kind of hegemonic financial power, but we have many powers. This is one aspect. Then a lot of literature since the 1990s have focused on power shifts in a broader sense, including not only this financial aspect, but also building on the understanding of the basic constituents of power of a state, or power of a block of states. That is the number of inhabitants of a country, the availability of resources of that country, and how well those resources and the manpower is used to generate welfare. Now, quite clearly, Asia since 1990s, and particularly in the ongoing millennia, have already demonstrated they have in a way, Asia has in a way risen to the, or is about to rise to the prominence that it has historically enjoyed. I mean, in the sense of economic resources or natural resources, and in the sense of population, the former center states of global system, US and the European Union or the EU or the transatlantic area, is well, loses all comparisons. Even counted together, the transatlantic area in the sense of manpower is far behind even one of the major Asian powers, China or India. And indeed, since the rise of economic, political, military powers in the Asia, this asymmetry between the emerging and the old 19th century, 20th century powers is becoming more manifest and important. That is quite visible in the structures of international governance. The WTO, of the World Trade Organization, has already since the beginning of 2000, since the Cancun conference, been revolutionized in a sense, in the sense that while it was built upon the will and directives of the United States, the US lost its ability to dictate what is best for the economy, for the whole world. But I suppose it has the former major powers have not been able to adjust themselves to the changing situation, which has led to the deadlock or the problems of global governance, or the emergence of trade regionalism that no longer does seem to be well, that has competitive elements. So yeah. In addition to these challenges or this kind of dissolution or fragmentation of global governance structures and organizations, or at least the growing disgruntlement or the inability of global institutions to efficiently provide global goods. In addition to this, the very integration within say European Union has become challenged, and also the cooperation between the US and EU. I mean, Donald Trump's presidency did not just put an end to the Obama government's goals for sustained global leadership through these mega regional trade agreements, but it also disrupted or ended the quite fundamental and deep sense of trust between the European states and the United States. So today, it seems quite clear the European states cannot really count on, and perhaps should not even count on merely the United States as the foremost ally, nor should or can the transatlantic area be any longer seen as a singular power block. Why I say it should not perhaps do this is because of the asymmetry of power resources if we compare the transatlantic area to, say, just China alone. So perhaps the biggest challenge then of the change, perhaps, is then the rise of the Indo-Pacific region as something that comes next in terms of central power region in the world. Now, Indo-Pacific does not just involve China and India, but also major or middle powers or medium-sized powers that are well, like Japan and Australia, that are quite closely linked to the transatlantic region too. So there are changes within how the global order, because of the changes, is being constructed or composed. There is no singular power or singular, like if we learn Huntingtonian terms, there is no one civilization and entity that has a kind of hegemonic role in the world, as was the case, I suppose, during the Anglo-Saxon or the hegemonic area or hegemonic era of US dominance. In the Indo-Pacific era, the emerging one, it appears that even though China is the greatest player, it is population-wise not like well, India it's on even level on terms of population, but also there is no such cultural dominance that would legitimize us to talk about a Asian region in such a manner unified by culture, political norms, or integrated allied systems. That was the case with the transatlantic system. So there is more pluralism, there is more contestations. Yet still we see that the region has become or is becoming a center. So now, if we see that one region is emerging as perhaps the predominant one, the Indo-Pacific region, and if we do not see, or if we at the same time see these quite deep contestations between even the major powers of the Indo-Pacific region, like India and China, then the question arises: how do we sustain governability, and what indeed comes next? I mean, the need of cooperation has not become smaller or less significant, but in contrast, the climate change is making the need of cooperation much more urgent than perhaps ever before. And the fact that the very populous areas of well, China, of South Asia, East Asia. A big proportion of the population is or at this moment or yet do not enjoy the same levels or the levels of economic and social well-being as do the people or populations in the developed countries. I mean, this implies that the very practical things like access to clear or clean drinking water, access to electricity, access to medication, access to education. So the demand of fair and decent living standards, and yes, even the basic human right of access to clear drinking water. None of these things is yet to be taken granted in Asia or in the very center stage of future power. And I think that this fact and the fact of scarcity and the urgency of climate change, the need to make changes in our system of production and economic cooperation, makes the solution of these dilemmas something that much more than perhaps ever before indeed necessitates cooperation and leadership. So this brings us to the next point, or the third.
Marko.
Yes.
Sorry to interfere. You have taken the 20 minutes, so we have the other presentations and some moment for the debate. So 10 minutes to finish, okay? Okay.
I will need 5. Okay, so how should we approach these things? I think that here we could look at BRICS as a kind of model, because BRICS consists of heterogeneous group of players. I mean, India and China were a few years ago on the verge of war because of a border crisis. And the states indeed are culturally, linguistically, economically, politically quite different states. Yet they are able indeed to cooperate. The BRICS are, even though they have. I mean, even though the BRICS presents us with a system of cooperation that is not. That is not overwhelming. I mean, that does not comply all the powers, all the members of it, to agree on everything, or form a unified bloc. It is a pluralistic bloc. It is a bloc that ensures cooperation in certain areas at the will of the participants, and with disregard to the asymmetries of power between its members. At the same time, it does allow its members to aspire cooperation in other areas with other parties. So this is quite a distinction compared to, for example, European integration or say NATO. So imagine if the European Union would have cooperated closely while it was still the closest ally of the United States. Imagine that it would have cooperated closely with China and India, or formed formed a trade union with China and India. At the same time, as it was negotiating the transatlantic integration agreement. I would argue that this would have been quite distant from what could have happened. But this is not the case so much with the BRICS. And indeed, BRICS is supportive of multilateralism. So I would now argue that as the Indo-Pacific region, consisting of pluralistic powers, is emerging as a center state of world politics, and as the region is divided by quite steep contestations of economic or political kind. Given this context, it would appear that we should investigate into the ability of BRICS to provide us a kind of model for future cooperation that is not all pervasive, but that is based on issue-specific cooperation that allows for contestations to exist and that allows contestations to exist and different kinds of overlapping, even to some extent conflicting other alliances to be formed. But that forms a kind of web of let's say minilaterals that provide the glue for cooperation. And indeed, as a kind of area of discussion, it can also provide for a platform where common solutions can be discussed without particularistic interests of the most powerful players to disrupt the general will of participants. Yeah, well, I suppose I will because of the time limits, I suppose I will close here. Well, I should maybe mention that there is also, while BRICS provides us perhaps with an empirical case of something that could become a model for, at least provide some examples or some cases for, anyway, a case study for a new model for governance in the Indo-Pacific order. There is also theoretical sources. Say, for example, in Indian classic political literature, that can be used to augment and learn from and dissect or analyze closely what there is, what the kind of clues and lessons we can learn from BRICS. So there are indeed theoretical and empirical sources, I would argue, that makes governability and cooperation in the Indo-Pacific order possible and doable. But this indeed implies that we need to turn to these kind of non-Western sources of knowledge, both empirical and theoretical, to understand them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marko, for your presentation. Kiitos. And we can check that we have complementarity between the thematics. So I hope we can all bring questions and comments so that we can have a small debate after the presentations. So Marko, as soon as you can stop sharing the screen, I would move to the next presentation. So is Shraddha in, or we move directly to the, so let's move to Devika, and in the case Shraddha is in the scene, can be the last presentation. So now I have the pleasure to introduce the presentation of Devika Misra, concerning BRICS in the post-pandemic world, detangling forms of cooperation and aid. So welcome, Devika, the floor is yours. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Am I audible? Okay, excellent. So I'm a little sorry. I've had some tech issues. I don't have a PowerPoint, but the good thing is that I have a very quick presentation, so we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. Very good day to everyone. I can see that a bunch of us are Brazilian and some of us are probably joining us from the rest of the world. So I'll just say good day. And I'm very glad to be the last person on the panel because the presentations have been excellent and all my colleagues have gone into details. And the greatest thing is that none of us sat together and really talked about what we were going to be presenting. But somehow all the topics have linked together. So my name is Devika. I'm an assistant professor in India, and I'm also a PhD candidate at JNU in India. I don't particularly study the BRICS specifically, but I study Latin American integration. And if you are an Indian who studies Brazil, you can't really avoid reading and studying about the BRICS. So a bunch of things have been happening, and I've been following these debates with some interest. So I have some questions and I have some ideas and some puzzles which I see linking with what Giovanni, Marko, and Gabriel have been saying. So I'm going to present these ideas to you, and hopefully we can all make sense of these big questions that my colleagues have been asking and asking us to think about what could the future look like, what could a possible solution to the global crisis right now look like, what could a new normal look like. So there are very palpable shifts in the global world order. I think Marko spent considerable time talking about this. Especially in the dynamics of the post-pandemic world order. It's not just social or economic, it's also political. Things seem to be shifting with new reticences and equations of hegemony and hegemon. Is there a hegemon? Is there a recalcitrant hegemon? Is hegemony in defeat? Is there a new hegemon on the rise? An increasingly contested binary between national and global, and almost, a simultaneous insistence reinforced by the pandemic on the need to develop equitable solutions for pandemic management. And all of this together make the BRICS a particularly fascinating lens to study these shifts from. We've all been talking about global shifts and global changes and new world order, emergent world order. But how do we really make sense of what's going on beyond these questions? Where are the evidences? What are the inconsistencies? And I think if you look at what's happening in the BRICS, it makes it very, very interesting. So my perspective is quite unique because I'm an Indian who studies Brazil. And because I'm an Indian who studies Brazil, I have a different lens. But I also, as a South Asian, I'm very aware of the dynamics between India and China. So it's a very, I would say it's a very interesting perspective to come into this debate from. Again, this is very much a developing idea. So all I have are a series of questions and I have thoughts. And I think that they might lead us to possible discussions on many of the questions that my colleagues have been raising. And these questions are particularly like much of the information that is out in the media, op-eds, new articles about BRICS have a lot to say about what is going to be the relevance of BRICS in the post-pandemic world. What is its potential for survival in the post-pandemic world? And what is going to be the significance of BRICS in the post-pandemic world order construction? Most importantly, given that this is the People's BRICS and the platform where I'm talking about these interesting but still to be totally formulated ideas, I'm interested in, again, posing a few questions of the policies and politics of aid and cooperation in the BRICS. I'm not going to go into the detail of the financial cooperation because I think Giovanni did that already. But I'm going to talk about what should this cooperation look like. What can be the manifestations that this cooperation takes in order for it to make more sense to us, in order for it to kind of undo this anxiety about, are the BRICS relevant? So my first question is very simple. Why are the BRICS, and why is the BRICS as a grouping important in the post-pandemic world? So where I was looking for material to kind of build up my presentation, there's a recent report by finance ministers of the BRICS, and I'm quoting, it says, the global economic prospects are expected to evolve continuously, subject to downside risks, some of which could materialize and impose increased pressure on vulnerable economies, in particular, the worsening pandemic dynamics due to lack of access to vaccines, price pressures, acute financial tightening, and widening inequalities. So just from going through this one document, and it's freely available on the internet if you want to go and take a look, vaccine access and development of health infrastructure seem to be very, very important when we talk about the theme of this BRICS as well, building back better, continuity, solidarity, all the things that Gabriel was talking about. So right from that very first extraordinary meeting of foreign ministers that happened in April 2020, as an Indian, it was very interesting to see the kind of regional forums that were being activated. So in June, there was an intervention in NAM, and it was very interesting because Prime Minister Modi had a statement to give at NAM, something he hasn't actively attended since he has come to power. SARC was reactivated. So it only made sense that BRICS happened almost 2 months before that first intervention in NAM. BRICS is very important. BRICS is a strategic instrument for Indian foreign policy makers. So since that very first extraordinary meeting, there has been an insistence on the shared futures and the need for member countries to come together. This conversation about community and solidarity is very, it's the cornerstone of that meeting. And, there was an insistence that the BRICS must set an example and bolster multilateralism by following a scientific, logical, and connected path. So remember what's happening at this point of time, right? You have China, and at least as an Indian, at that point of time, all over the world, you would be reading really virulent criticisms of China, how it's a biological warfare. People were very angry about it, and especially in India, because we were also, as Marko was talking about, involved in this border contestation with China, which only worsened as the pandemic went on. In Brazil, you have Bolsonaro, who's completely denying that, the pandemic poses a real threat. And then you have India, which is also simultaneously trying to, say, no, we are scientific, but we are not China. It's continuously trying to present itself as this other option. So this conversation about, in this metrics, this conversation about solidarity and following a logical and connected path, how nobody really talked about that. But the rhetoric of it was there. And that was, very interesting. So as Wang, the Chinese foreign minister, puts it, again, this is a quote, BRICS needed to champion the approach of consultation and cooperation for shared benefits in governance. So the BRICS needed to, set a form of multilateralism almost, as it were. So it was a model that had to be first negotiated amongst these very, different members with different attitudes towards the pandemic, and then it needed to be disseminated in the world, as it were. Because remember that this is the time where the conversation about multilateralism is dead, state sovereignty is supreme. All of this is, going on simultaneously. It needed to take lead in advancing global governance reform. This is true to character. This is something that BRICS has been saying from the beginning. It needed to protect the sanctity of and ensure the maintenance of global supply chains. So when a Chinese foreign minister says this, As a normal IR scholar who's continuously reading about this global supply chain warfare between USA and China, it's loaded, right? So, so that was very interesting. So this pandemic was clearly a moment of leadership for the BRICS, as far as I see it, where they needed to, again, this is the quote, safeguard legitimate rights and interests and space for development, right? It's almost you know, and almost a protector. It's almost as somebody who has a voice and who needs to speak up at that moment so that others listen. Not just for ourselves, as Wang said, but also for other emerging market and developing countries. So that point that Marko was making about it being a pluralistic bloc and how they, even though these countries are not allies and partners in any strong sense, they are all trying to maneuver this institution, this organization to increase their status in the international arena. This was very clear in that statement that Wang is making. So this approval of the BRICS, you know, that Wang said all the way back in April 2020. In the recent you know, speech, you can find this on the External Affairs Ministry website by Prime Minister Modi. You know, this was echoed by him as well, and he suggested that in building back, again, this is a quote, building back resiliently, innovatively, credibly, and sustainably, the BRICS, you know, they were working towards enhancing speed and accessibility of vaccination, creating resilience by diversifying pharma and vaccine production capacities beyond the developed world, fostering innovation by creatively using digital tools for public good, ensuring reform of multilateral institutions to enhance their credibility, right? The multilateral institutions that we have right now are not, obviously, this is the biggest grouse of, especially I would say, the G4 countries, that the system doesn't represent how the world order has changed. And it's not credible, it's not believable. And promoting sustainable development by articulating a common BRICS voice on environmental and climate issues. This is something that, again, I think Marko was talking about, how there needs to be this consensus towards figuring out climate change, figuring out sustainable measures of production. So this is something that even Prime Minister Modi has said now. He's saying that the BRICS are doing this. There is a lot of commendation for what the BRICS are doing as countries. But very interestingly, whenever you see accounts of BRICS dealing with the pandemic, you will find each country's individual efforts listed. So, for example, when I was trying to look for information on how the BRICS have come together to offer aid, it would very much tell you how the central banks of each country are offering aid. What were the various policies instituted domestically? But as a comparative regional scholar, you know, as a scholar of regionalism, I want to know what also how coordinated were all of them in this platform of New Development Bank, which Giovanni has obviously gone into in detail. So the assertion that by Wang, you know, this is again some op-ed article where he's being quoted. He said that BRICS nations have cooperated more in terms of vaccine development and sharing than non-BRICS countries, right? And if you think about it, out of the 5 BRICS, even Brazil now has its own vaccine, which it's planning to, you know, send out. India has done very well. Russia has done very well. China has done very well. They all, China, Russia, and India, they were all leading this vaccination effort, their respective vaccination diplomacies. So if you're looking at health and infrastructure and vaccine access being important, there's a lot of evidence that you know, BRICS did have success in coordinating. Was it a considerable or a complete success? I'm going to go into that later. So this assertion that, you know, BRICS countries cooperated more effectively, there's a lot of surface level evidence which could support it. So, for example, if you look at the vaccine program in Brazil, currently 7 vaccines are approved for use in Brazil. And out of those 7, you have 3, Russian Sputnik, Indian Covishield, and Chinese Sinopharm, making a sizable chunk. Of course, the AstraZeneca that's being manufactured, who is manufacturing it, without going into that, but just the sheer presence of the BRICS as providers of vaccine to a country which has had a devastating time with the pandemic. is, on paper it looks like this cooperation did work out. These assertions have some body. And again, this is not to include the sizable and considerable Chinese consignment of doses, as well as the Indian shipments that also went out to Brazil. Similarly, in all over Latin America, if you look, the Russian vaccine has been very, very predominant. Chinese vaccine has been very predominant. So but again, there are various complications with the procurement and the usage and the eventual denial of taking the aid from the Chinese as well, or if not denial, then reluctance. So this brings me to my second question. The second important question is, if the BRICS will survive this India-China conflict, especially in terms of the increasing bilateralization of its agenda. A lot of this is informed by a new issue of global policy. Some of my colleagues in India and my university have been writing for that paper. So a big concern for that issue was that this India-China conflict, what is it going to mean for BRICS? Can the BRICS survive this conflict? And I think Marko was also talking about how, he makes that great point about how from transatlantic we are moving towards an Indo-Pacific centric world order. And what are the connotations of that Indo-Pacific world order? So right at the offset, before talking about this rivalry, I want to state that even though very vocal and virulent claims of this rivalry have been made in the media, all these accounts cannot always be taken at face value, because there's a long history, there's propaganda involved, there's a lot of nationalism involved. So sometimes it can be very easy to get caught up in the wrong sort of information. And it's difficult to figure out which account to really trust. Nevertheless, border disputes between the two have intensified. India's participation in the Quad, at least if the US think tanks are to be believed, it has bolstered Chinese mistrust of Indian intentions, which has been a traditional problem in India-China relations, that either not being able to truly gauge what the other thinks of it and what the other aims to do towards it in the international realm. And most importantly, various claims have been proffered about India's attempt to eke out its national interest in the Indo-Pacific. Like, what is India trying to do in the Indo-Pacific? So the really jingoistic conversation would go on about how India is trying to balance China. And then you will have some really conservative pundits who will say that, no, India can't balance China. But there is clear evidence that Indo-Pacific is very important for India, for trade, for security, and for maintaining its, trying to be a regional leader in South Asia. So interestingly,
Devika, sorry to Devika, so we have 3 minutes to conclude your speech.
Okay, give me 5 and I'll be super quick. I'm almost there.
Okay.
Nevertheless, the point is that domestically in Brazil, this tussle for influence at the national level employed this divide between India and China in a very interesting way. It was the federal government of Sao Paulo offsetting the anti-science central attitude towards the pandemic by acquiring Chinese Sinovac. This drive then prompted, Bolsonaro to kind of increase his efforts towards procuring vaccines from other sources. So this fill-up is very interesting because this kind of proves that new actors are also involved when we talk about cooperation amongst the BRICS. So the more assertive international position of governors, as Brancoli says, kind of puts into perspective that different political groups in Brazil establish international cooperation practices and should be taken into account by states and companies that wish to operate in Brazil. However, what is the view? Is the India-China rivalry going to make BRICS irrelevant? So a very realist perspective from Professor Chaulia, and he says that no, this is never ever going to happen. It's not a really, he's very pessimistic. He says it's not really a model for South-South cooperation, but in terms of strategic influence, it's going to continue to remain very important. And as he puts it, for China, BRICS is one of the many multilateral institutions with which to challenge and push back the United States. For India, BRICS is less of an anti-Western formation and increasingly a soft balancing instrument through which China can be bound to rules and moderate its assertive behavior. So again, all member states, as is clear from that small Brazilian example I gave, are finding a way to kind of make new and important foreign policy choices in terms of their national interest while trying to maneuver the strategic interests of different members. So coming to my third question, whither lies hopes for inclusive agenda in this coalition community continuum? So Bruce, this is a Bruce and Papa and Vasquez is talking about this. And she talks about how BRICS are operating around this continuum, whether they are a coalition or whether they are a community. So at the coalition level, the point that Bruce and Papa are making are that, it's this, they're not really allies, as Marko was saying, but they try to kind of eke out their best strategic interests. Their joint statements minimize the risk that diverging interests and defections could compromise coalition cohesion. And it also kind of ensures that while, some kind of having some sort of organization, it doesn't interfere with the members' own objectives. So Vasquez has talked about how BRICS has become increasingly bilateral. It's not really working as a regional whole. There's a bilateralization of the agenda. And as we know from the experiences of Latin American integration, this also allows it to continue to exist precisely because all these different ideological and political perspectives can be managed by the freedom that bilateral agenda setting gives these actors. So this bilateralization, Vasquez says, expands the menu of BRICS multilateralism a la carte by allowing countries to individually pursue transnational and interstate interests. However, coming to my final question, where does the community end if it's all bilateral, as Vasquez is suggesting and as evidence seems to suggest in this new changing world order? Where does the community end feature in this bilateralization? In this increasing contestation of strategic goals, actions, and policy preferences, what is the common identity that binds? Because remember, we've been talking about how much stratification is existent amongst members themselves. So this is where I would say that the pandemic, especially the development of health infrastructure, is the common narrative that binds and directs the BRICS community. So the post-pandemic reconstruction seems to be the common narrative, especially in the insistence on the development of health infra, vaccine development and access, and sustainability that seems to provide this common narrative, favoring the community end of the continuum. Again, the prospect of shared opportunities or threats coming together, it might help to change perspectives, help in the development of common identity, and that's where the community hope lies. So finally, ending, Gabriel, ending. Finally, I have three questions, which I think my colleagues have also raised. What would make the BRICS truly relevant in terms of cooperation? Firstly, as Giovanni had mentioned, he said right at the beginning that the BRICS must develop their own international framework, financial framework and institutions. How is this financial cooperation and aid offered by the NDB? How is it different? How is it really relevant in terms, and how effective is it when compared to aid being received by these countries from other sources? How is it going to develop? Is there a future? Is there a vision mapped out there? Secondly, all this insistence about vaccine diplomacy, all this insistence about vaccine access. India and South Africa have been requesting and have been demanding that the patents be removed and this technology be made available to all. The BRICS, the other BRICS have not supported this policy outright. So do we think that the BRICS as a whole will lobby against the removal of vaccine patents and lobby for greater, more inclusive access for all? Can we, if that happens, then it kind of gives some evidence to, that kind of gives some strength to what they're saying. And finally, the final point, this inequality among BRIC countries, the stratification of the North and South, the development of the New South, this desire for leadership in the New World Order. How do the BRICS respond to the deeper divisions forecasted in the post-pandemic recovery, especially given the basis of the BRICS itself, which was their demand for a reformed, more inclusive world order. What are the inconsistencies there, and do we see it changing? So yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you for bearing with me, and I hope everybody followed along. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Devika, for the great point. I'm really glad to see the synergies between the presentations. I would hear you guys for much longer. Sorry to be in this position of being controlling the time. Rafa and Amanda, would you please join to take a picture to register this moment? So we would like to invite everyone to open the camera so that we have a register of this issue. I don't know, Ashish, can you remove the highlight so that we can see the screen, the whole screen, the gallery? Yes, now it's done. So Rafa, if you can conduce. I think Rafa is muted, so I'll do the 3, 2, 1 for you, Rafa. So Vanessa and Larissa, so Renato, if you can, to open your camera. So we're gonna go on 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. Done? Okay, thank you for everyone. So guys, we had a question here regarding non-governmental actors, but I think because of the organization of the forum, we should be going to an end. So I will propose 1 minute final word for each panelist so that we conclude this in the next 5 minutes. So we're gonna have Shrada's presentation in another time, but anyone who is interested on her presentation PowerPoint, we can forward it to you. So here in the chat, I had put the Mariana Mazzucato, the new global economic consensus for who is interested in the thematic. And now I would do my final words, thanking all of you for participating, thanking a lot Ashish for the organization and support, thanking the panelists to share your expertise with us here in this panel. And hopefully we'll keep in touch and join next occasion. Rafa, if you could share the Linktree of our research group, is a way of you guys being in contact with us. So please, Rafa, put the link here in the chat. So here you can see the activities we are developing, and very welcome to join us, join our platforms. In this moment, I would pass for the 1 brief minute of final remarks, final words or goodbye words for Giovanni, Marko, and Devika. So Joe, the word is yours.
Yes, it was very stimulating to be here with you discussing such things, and all that I can say, even because there is another debate and I have to leave immediately due to travel issues, is that as we see, and in particular as Devika lastly highlighted with her presentation and reasoning, is that the BRICS issue is an ever-evolving issue. And I think that since we do not have the glass sphere to predict the future, I think that most of the future of BRICS countries as an international group and international grouping will depend again on how they will implement their financial and economic cooperation in the first instance. And this is not an obsession on my part, but this is based on the real evidence that without an effective multilateral framework of financial and economic cooperation, nobody, and I say again, nobody, will be able to cope with the upcoming challenge of the post-pandemic world. So, thank you for your useful insights, for your useful thought, and I hope to be with you, together with you in the near future.
Thank you so much, Giovanni, for the great presentation and for the good final words. I would pass the word now for Marko for final 1 minute final remarks. Marko. Ashish, if you could unmute Marko and Devika. I don't know if I can do it by myself.
I'm
Yes.
unmuted. I'm unmuted.
Okay, Marko, 1 minute, Devika, then we go in the order. Marko?
Well, I don't think I have anything to add too much. I would like to thank you for all your inputs. Very interesting to hear all the topics and well, this seems to be quite a good area and promising area to do research on. So happy to know that we are so many that are interested in this field and share the same concerns. Thank you, and thank you for the organizers.
Marko, thank you for your presentation, for your final remarks. And now I'll pass to Devika for the 1 minute final words.
Sure. I just want to say that I think this was a great discussion, and especially the questions. Every single presenter had a series of questions because, as Giovanni was just saying, it's an evolving field. And I agree with him that there is need for this to go beyond rhetoric. And I'm a big fan of rhetorical regionalism. I study Latin American integration for that matter. But the fact of the matter is that this grouping came together precisely because of this economic developmental identity, right? So if there is no real development there, if that doesn't concretize in financial cooperation, in political solidarity, in coming together and forming, this asking for for them to remove patents for vaccine tech seems to be a really good point that all of them should be agreeing on. If that doesn't seem to happen, then I feel like it's a missed opportunity. And when we are studying the BRICS, I would suggest that we need to look at concrete evidences of what's happening today. And that question that's in the chat, I think Rafaela has put it about non-state actors. I'm very interested as well. I think Shraddha was probably going to talk about that, Gabriel. That would be a way to take it away from this very state-centric power struggle, which in my limited capacity, I seem to see unfolding right now. And that's my comments. And again, thanks to everyone at OOF. Thanks to my good friend Gabriel. And I had a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Devika, for your presentation, great presentation and final words. So as we can see, we have used in a very good way the time we had to discuss relevant points on international studies, cooperation, the role of multilateralism, as it was pointed here, this tendency to bilateralism, and all the features that these evolve. So I'm very thankful for the audience for joining us until now. Thankful to Giovanni, to Marko, to Devika to share their experience, their time, and their expertise with bringing these ideas to us so that we can have a good debate. We are talking about pluralism, and I'm glad that we have someone from Italy, someone from Finland, someone from India, someone from Brazil, because of course we have different backgrounds, and this makes the, let's say, the soup more tasty. So hope to see all of you presentially in the brief future. Thank you, Ashish, for the great support and for all the organization. And at this point, I would say see you soon. Thank you for all the inputs. Bye. Bye. Ciao, Devika. Ciao, Joe. Ciao, ciao. Ashish, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.